Hey there, students. In this lecture, I'm going to focus on a comparison of the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era because it sounds like Anna's class just started the Progressive Era, and one of the most important things about understanding this period is that we are comparing it with the Gilded Age before it, and it's really key to understanding the Progressive Era is understanding kind of the excesses of the Gilded Age. And I'm going to show you how to make evidence-based comparison arguments, because remember that we want to make sure that whenever we make comparisons, we have a general argument and we also have evidence to back up those comparisons. So in looking at the Gilded Age, this was an era of government support for big business. Now, one of the things that we want to clarify is a lot of people think that the Gilded Age was a laissez-faire era, and it really was not. Laissez-faire means that the government is staying out. So when we think about, for example, the Pacific Railroad Acts, which gave corporations large sums of government money and also gave them, subsidies, gave them land grants, and all of this other stuff that whatever big business wanted, government was going to give them. And there was a lot of corruption at this time, one of the most flagrant cases being the credit mobilier scandal, which was a case where the railroad executives created a shell company for construction so that they could pay themselves twice with government money. And a lot of people felt like that the public was getting screwed with the government always weighing in on the side of big business. So also in dealing with labor, every time there was a dispute between big business and labor, the federal government got in on the side of big business. The most noteworthy examples being the Great Railroad Strike and the Pullman Strike is another example of this, where you see that the government goes in on behalf of the corporation in opposition to the strikers. And so with the Progressive Era, what we see is a different tone from the government and really responding to the excesses of the Gilded Age, because there's a lot of outcry for government regulation of business, for the government not to just support big business all the time. And so there are a few things that you see in Teddy Roosevelt's administration, such as the Meat Inspection Act, which was a result of popular outcry that came out as a result of Upton Sinclair's publication of The Jungle, which was a work of fiction designed to try to get people to be sympathetic toward impoverished immigrants, but instead people read this and they're like, I don't really care about the impoverished immigrants, but is my meat really that dirty? And they don't want their meat dirty, okay? So they want the government to step in and do something, keep these corporations from messing up my meat. And the same thing with the creation of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. And then when we deal with labor, we're dealing with Teddy Roosevelt, who is showing a little love for labor. And he is bringing business leaders and labor leaders to the White House to try to mediate the settlement of the anthracite coal strike. Anthracite, okay? That's a hard word to say, is it not? Maybe it's just me. Try to say that 3 times fast. Anthracite.
Anthracite. Anthracite.
Boo! Okay, so that's a lot. But anyway, we want to be able to compare the government support for business versus government regulation of business. Now, also, let's think about in terms of antitrust legislation. The Sherman Antitrust Act, which was passed by Congress in 1890, was a weak piece of antitrust legislation that was actually used more against labor unions than it was against big business. That they moved in and used this against the strikers during the Pullman Strike. They used the Sherman Antitrust Act against labor when the intent, what the public wanted, was to fight trust in big business, not to treat labor unions like trust. And so during the Progressive Era, a stronger piece of antitrust legislation was passed, the Clayton Antitrust Act, which had stronger laws that the government could enforce to try to protect market competition, and it specifically exempted labor labor unions from its provisions. So with that, we've got a very brief but effective comparison when you're thinking about the Gilded Age versus the Progressive Era. The Gilded Age with strong government support for big business, the Progressive Era with government regulation of big business. We saw the Sherman Antitrust Act during the Gilded Age, which was not a very effective piece of antitrust legislation, versus the Clayton Antitrust Act, which was a strong piece of antitrust legislation. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, a little review for you, plenty more where that came from. Don't forget to subscribe, and much love to all of you, and it's always a pleasure.